over with kids is, when you're going through the whole thread and the entire arc of art, over the scope of time and in all these areas around the world, is all these recurring themes and recurring images, and I'm sure you're interested in these recurring symbols, like you'll see, I mean these symbols, that are have exactly the same meaning all around the world, which is just
I've become really interested in fortune tellers, palmists, and then just growing up first in Oak, we lived in Waxahachie, then Oak Cliff, and then Richardson, and then traveling through the Deep South. I've always loved the palmistry signs, and the idea that in a community there was somebody that knew more than you did, and they had this second sight or this gift of like seeing beyond the veil, and so there's always artwork connected with that, whether it's like the hand or maybe an all-seeing eye or something designed to lure you in. And so you see that same stuff in the sideshow banner art from the Midway, and so many religions use those kind of direct symbols to pull you in.
Sure.
All that stuff is kind of endlessly fascinating, because there are all these kind of threads that you wind up picking up, loose ends everywhere.
Right. So did you have eccentric grandparents also, Julie?
I really did not have eccentric grandparents. My family's all from Cooper and Delta County in Texas, and sweet people, country people. It was a very kind of grounding. It did make me always love and appreciate more and more as I get older as well the culture of the South and Texas, but I didn't have the abounding experience of history like Bruce did. I think my experience came, like my parents were from Delta County and then moved to Dallas and had started having children. It's me and my sister, and they always gave us the best life they ever could, and it was very middle class and not a deep cultural experience.
Right.
So it wasn't until I got into high school that I started thinking, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of people out there, you know, and there's so much out there. And I remember I was babysitting one summer, and two guy friends of mine brought over Sex Pistol records, and it changed my life. I was like, oh my God, listen to this. This is really great. You know, what an expression. And I was, I always had an adventurous spirit, so that really drove it, and I got fired, and I started trying to seek out music like that, because it had emotion, and it had like this, I grew up in the Methodist church. It's a wonderful place to grow up as far as learning tolerance and caring and love for other people, and how to treat people, and how to expect the world hopefully is. But it wasn't that kind of deep emotional spiritual thing like Bruce experienced through the Assembly of God. And so when I found punk rock music, it was like, oh my gosh, there's this expression.
Right.
And so that was really my foray into that. I mean, I was really driven by that. And so that's where I met Bruce, was in that scene of Dallas. And so I was living in Garland, Texas, and before I could drive, I would get someone to drive me to all these shows that no one knew exactly what I was talking them into.
Right.
And then later I started driving myself, and my parents now know, but they didn't know at the time, that I was driving to downtown Dallas 2 or 3 times a week from Garland. And I remember that I had seen Bruce at a show, because it was a pretty small punk rock scene in Dallas.
Right.
And then I had graduated and gone away to college in commerce for 1 semester, came back. Wasn't a good idea for me. And I was hanging out with a friend of mine, John Spath, and he's a photographer, now lives in Austin. He's a film guy. Great man. And he was photographing skateboard ramps, and I went with him to the blue ramp that day, or the clown ramp. What was that?
The one at Bachman Lake, I think it was the blue ramp, and then they added the clown panels.
And so I went there with him, and I recognized Bruce, and I sat down with him. and we started talking, and then I gave him my really $1 million come on line of inviting him over for a turkey sandwich. I actually had never used that line, and I've never used it again, but it seemed to have worked so well, that we didn't get together for the turkey sandwich then, but we did see each other that evening at a show in downtown Dallas.
Right.
And then that was pretty much it.
And you've seen each other every day since.
Every day since, just about.
We started doing the fanzine kind of as a result. We collaborated on an artistic endeavor that was called Bad Karma.
Okay.
And it was a cut and paste and a lot of hand-drawn stuff. It was a punk rock fanzine. And from about 1983 to 86, we put out a number of issues.
So we're, I apologize that I wasn't in the punk scene back in that day.
Sorry about
No, it's okay. Were these local bands that were?
No, they were actually national. It was a pretty big stop for Dallas. Dallas was a pretty big stop for bands.
Awesome.
I mean, there was definitely local bands and a lot of Texas bands, but it was a pretty big national stop for a lot of bands.
You went to a show before I went. I think it was like in '81. You went to a show at Studio D.
Yes.
And it was
the Hugh Beaumont Experience.
Hugh Beaumont Experience, Minor Threat, Big Boys.
It had me hooked.
Maybe the Misfits too.
I don't know. It wasn't them. I just remember when I was always a Leave It to Beaver fan, and then the Hugh Beaumont Experience, I was like, oh yeah, we've got to do that. And they were local, and it was in the rattiest of a building with no bathroom, and just...
This is all Deep Ellum, or
yeah, it was.
Studio D was the earliest punk club in Deep Ellum,
and I loved every bit of it because it was so unlike Garland, Texas. It was just like, it really made me excited. And I remember the people I were with, they couldn't leave enough. I kept losing them and being like, oh, and they'd find me and say, let's go, and I'm like, oh yeah, and then I'd try to get off again. But it was a very big scene, and I mean, I bet I've seen Black Flag 7 or 8 times. So there was lots of national bands that came through. It was at the Liberty Hall, the Twilight Room. It was the same place. It changed names several times, and then it moved back into Deep Ellum again with the Prophet Bar and what was
Theater
that?
Gallery.
Theater Gallery.
Yeah,
right.
And I guess Jeff Lyles, who books music for the Kessler. He really was kind of the visionary guy at Theater Gallery, where he wanted to combine art and music. And basically, Russell Hobbs had that space, and Jeff was booking bands there. But Jeff also was curating his friends' artwork into that space too. And kind of one of the earliest concepts of putting art and music together. And then later, Isaac Tigert did that at the House of Blues.
Yeah.
And that kind of things.
It was a cool time. But then when Bruce and I got together, we did the fanzine. We really enjoyed doing this art project of this collage and interviewing bands, and it was something that we were enjoying that together. And I started working at Half Price Books as a job. I've always enjoyed a little side job just to love everything about some goofy job, and so I worked one day at the Richardson Half Price Books.
Right.
And that really started fueling our collecting together. And we started buying a lot of records and a lot more books. And I think the first thing we did together was to buy and sell something and present what we had collected was a record convention. And I think through that, it was such a charge to share what you had found and then to make money with it and to meet people. That's probably really fueled everything we do in a lot of ways. And so then we started thinking, well, we could do flea markets and we could go places by doing a flea market. And that's really what drove us. And about that time, we ended up moving to Waxahachie. Dexter.
It's okay.
And then when we moved to Waxahachie, we rented a little bitty bar. Well, we started at the mezzanine of the health food store first, and we had kind of a resale place. And then we got our first shop, which was an old barber shop, and it didn't even have electricity. And we rented it for years. And on trying to go places, we would do flea markets in Atlanta.
Was that the old barbershop on Ferris Avenue over here?
No, it was downtown.
Okay.
It was on
Down
the
the
street on Franklin. We've stayed pretty true to Franklin Street for most of our 30 years. And that was in 1987 that we rented the barbershop.
Right.
And we had oil lamps because we didn't have electricity, and we were young, and we were too scared and to even ask our landlord about why don't we have electricity.
Oh my gosh.
And
Well, the rent was only $60.
yeah, we didn't want to rock that boat.
I hear
because-
stories about that a lot. When the rent is super cheap, you don't ask the
Yeah,
landlord for
exactly.
anything.
Yeah.
So we started doing this flea market in Atlanta, and so we could go across the South and travel that area, and that brought us to. I guess prior to that, we were doing a flea market in Dallas.
Fair Park.
Yeah, at Fair Park, and one of our friends and clients liked what we had and got us enough that she said, I think you guys need to meet this folk artist named Reverend J.L. Hunter in Dallas. And that was the very first folk artist we ever met. And we went and met he and his wife Ruby, and we just fell in love with them.
Right.
And we fell in love with how he looked at wood, and he made figures out of twigs, and he could see the figure in it, and just his vision. It was really what we had already liked. We just hadn't put it together that we could meet someone that was creating something like that. And we had such a charge out of it, and we started visiting them once a week. We'd come on Monday, and we'd hear this Monday version of his Sunday sermon, because he really was a South Dallas Baptist preacher at True Light Baptist Church. And that really fueled us. So when we started doing the Atlanta flea market, we thought about Howard Finster, who was on the Talking Heads album cover, and we're like, we looked him up. We were like, we could visit him.
Right.
And the REM album cover had R.A. Miller on it. Well, we could visit him. And through that, we started just really researching, like getting books and going to exhibits and finding people we liked, and realizing we could go and meet these people. And it was great. And we try never to have any preconceived idea of like going there to buy anything or anything other than just, we like that person's stuff, let's go meet them and hear about it. And so we spent years from about 90 or 91 to present, visiting artists and doing that.
Yeah. So you would go and you would meet them and develop relationships, but would it right off the bat be a business relationship, or was it,
I guess most of the time, because at that time there weren't many people. There were some people visiting the folk artists, but not a lot. It wasn't near as popular as it is now, and of course, most of them aren't even living, the people we were visiting, but it was a very limited amount of people.
Right.
So those people were making a living by people like ourselves coming to buy things.
Right.
And
we realized a lot of it was taking place in rural areas. The art was being created in rural areas, and even galleries were opening in small towns. Back then, one of the probably most active galleries was the Robert Cargo Folk Art Gallery in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Okay.
And you could go to the Kentuck Festival and meet Mose Tolliver, Jimmy Lee Sudduth, maybe hear Othar Turner and the Fife and Drum bands, and a handful of other artists. And that night Robert would have an opening at his gallery of work by those artists and maybe a few others. So or our friend Justin Massengale had a gallery in Clinton, Mississippi, outside of Jackson. And so we realized on that I-20 kind of, we spent a lot of time between here and in Atlanta. There were so many artists you could see the very first day out. And so we just started to visit artists, and you shared information with other collectors. Mm-hmm. So at that time, 1989, Black Folk Art in America opens at the Corcoran Gallery of Art.
Okay.
And it's land-breaking. We never saw that show. It came as close as Rice University